From the book of 2 Kings, the 7th chapter, the 3rd through the 9th verses, I want to preach for the time that we have together from the subject, Back to the Future. Back to the future. My brothers and my sisters, ladies and gentlemen, I want to suggest at the outset that I believe because of where we've been and where we are, God has a bright future in store for all of us. I believe that God is going to bless us exceeding abundantly above all we could ask or think according to the power at work in us. I believe that our future is one that sees us growing holistically, mind, body, and spirit. Ours is a future that provides effective ministry from the toddler to the teen, from the single parent to the empty nester, from the senior in high school to the senior citizen, and from the young adult to the young at heart. Ours is a future as uncomfortable as it may sometimes be, where we, just like Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, become all things to all people, that we, by all means, might save some. Ours is a future that envisions worship experiences where everyone is welcome, where there is room for the choir and the praise team, room for the organ and the keyboard, room for the anthem, the hymn, and the Wow Gospel Top 100. This is the future that God has designed for us, but there's just one obstacle in our way. How do we get there? How do we get from here, our present, to there, our future? Let me be perfectly honest. I know that we can get there. I'm just not sure if we will get there. I'm not sure if we have enough power, enough force, enough energy, enough momentum. I'm just not sure if we have all that we need. But I believe that hidden in our own life's stories are some tools to take us where we need to go. The theme for this sermon is taken from the 1980s trilogy Back to the Future, starring Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd. In it, the main character, Marty McFly, uses Doc Brown's time machine to travel 30 years into the past. Ultimately, I want to suggest that Marty is faced with the same dilemma that we are. Marty knows where he needs to go, but he doesn't have what he needs to get there. Marty needs 1.21 gigawatts and 88 miles per hour. While we don't need plutonium or gasoline, like Marty, we too need more power, more momentum, and extra push, if you will. My friends, I want to suggest that in order to reach the future that God has for us as individuals and as a church, like Marty, our story involves a journey back in time. Where have you been? What's your story? What's in your past? Because where you've been is just as important as where you are or where you're going. Many ministers and motivational speakers will tell you that your past doesn't matter, that your past is not important. It's not about where you've been, they'll say, but it's all about where you're going. But I believe that there's power in our past. There's an untapped resource of force and momentum in our history. This morning's sermonic focus comes from the Old Testament Hebrew Scriptures, the 7th chapter of 2 Kings. Therein we observe an unfolding conflict between the people of Israel and the people of Aram. If you begin in chapter 6, you can see that the chips are stacked against the people of Israel, for there is famine in the land, inflation in the land, and an enemy camp in striking distance. In chapter 6, it doesn't look too good for the people of Israel. And yet, as we transition into chapter 7, the text begins to take a shift in favor of the Israelites. The beginning part of verse 3 reads, "Now there were 4 men outside the city gate." Did I leave something out? Let me try that one more time. Now there were 4 leprous men outside the city gate. There we go. I got it right that time. These weren't just any individuals. This was a group of lepers outside the entrance to the city. And my friends, today I want to suggest that each and every one of us can tell our story one of two ways. We can easily tell the version without leprosy, or we can tell the version with leprosy. And if we are ever going to reach the future that God has for us, it will start with embracing all of our past, because it is the leprosy that makes all the difference in the world. It is the leprosy of this group's past that puts them in the right place at the right time. To be clear, so serious was leprosy that this cultural period understood that even inanimate objects such as clothing or even entire homes could contract leprosy. Leprosy was considered not just an external disease, but the external was considered to be symptomatic of an underlying spiritual disease as well. This is the diagnosis of the four men in our text, and it explains why they were where they were. These men were at the entrance of the gate because they were not welcome in the city. Their leprous condition made them both outcasts and untouchables. And yet it is also clear that if those men had not been in their leprous condition, they wouldn't have been where they needed to be in order to get where they needed to go. We've been through some stuff, both good and bad. We've seen some things, said some things, and done some things that have made up an eventful past. And so let us embrace all that has brought us to this moment, even as we recommit ourselves to moving forward. It's one thing to embrace our past. It's another thing to try to embrace the present. Oftentimes, it is easier to look back and see what God has done. Less easy is it to see what God is doing in the midst of our right now. Sometimes our current circumstances can make us ask God, what are you doing right now in my life, in my school, in my home, in my family, in my friendships, in the midst of this election cycle, when life throws you a curve, when expectations go unmet, when plans go awry? It can make you ask, God, what are you doing right now? I know what you've done in the past. I can see that clear as day. But what you are doing now is a lot less clear. To be sure, in this season as a church, we have to be wondering, what is God doing? How is God working in our midst in this time of transition? How timely and apropos it must seem to pause in this season and ask, with regard to us as individuals and families and as one faith community, God, what are you doing right now? How timely, but may I add, how wrong? How misguided is this line of questioning? How misplaced our focus? How mistaken are we? Perhaps, yes, this is a moment calling us to ask some tough questions, but maybe those questions need not be addressed to God, but rather instead directed at us. Excuse the harsh language and what must feel like a sharp turn of events, but I want to suggest that not always, but today in particular, it is a foolish waste of our time to expend valuable energy in the exercise of asking God, what are you doing right now? When we should be using that energy to ask in this present moment, what am we prepared to do right now? In this moment, in this season, what are we going to do to participate in bringing about the future that God has for us? There is power in accepting our role in the present, in getting us to our God-ordained future. In the 7th chapter, the 3rd verse in the New Revised Standard Version, it reads, "Now there were 4 leprous men outside the city gate, who said to one another, why should we sit here until we die?" To put it into words that we might use today, they asked the question, what are we waiting for? That's the question that this group, this leprous men, this congregation of imperfect individuals asked themselves. What are we waiting for? Why should we sit here until we die? The brothers sit weigh their options, and when we can go back and die, we can stay here and die, or we can go forward and probably die. These leprous men choose the probable over the definite. They choose in verse 4, therefore let us desert to the Aramean camp. If they spare our lives, we shall live, and if they kill us, we shall but die. So they arose at twilight to go to the Aramean camp. And what they find is that the God who had been with them in their leprous state had placed them in a position that when they acted, God created for them a favorable future. Today, let each of us and all of us commit to making that decision, to press forward, confident that on the other side of our decision is the future that God has for us. And so, having decided to move, we've gotten up and gone out, no longer at the city gates, no longer stuck where we were, but not quite where we want to be yet either. We're in another place, that place between no longer and not yet, that place between Egypt and the promised land. And that place can be disconcerting. That place can feel like the wilderness. That place can be a confusing and uncomfortable place. And friends, I would not want us to be inadequately prepared for the totality of what lies before us on our journey. God's designed future is rarely a swift and smooth transition. Quite the contrary, ladies and gentlemen. Chapter 7, verse 5 reads, so they arose at twilight to go to the Aramean camp. But when they came to the edge of the Aramean camp, there was no one there at all. I want to focus on that season, those moments between their rising and when they had finally reached the camp. I'm adding to the text, so forgive me for my inherent eisegesis, but knowing people of faith, I can assume that it wasn't a smooth transition. Can you see the four lepers walking with each other as the city gates drift out of sight? Can you see them glancing back, wondering if they had made the right decision? Can you hear the mumbling underneath their breath, we should have stayed where we were a little while longer? The famine wasn't all that bad. Our situations are not all unlike those four leprous men. Haven't you ever had decider's remorse? Haven't you ever wondered before the dust had settled, did I make the right choice? Did I choose the right career? Did I choose the right path? Did I choose the right mate? As a church family, indeed, there are and will be moments when we ask those same questions. Are we headed in the right direction? Did we choose the right leaders? Did we make the right investments? Did we choose the right path? Those are the moments when what we want are assurances. We know who God will be. We know that God will do. But what we want to know is how God will do it. And thanks be to God that as people of faith, we've got the answers before we take the test. In our Bible, we not only get to know that God will bless, but if we look close enough, we even get to know how God will bless. Our text teaches us that God is always orchestrating situations even before we get to where we are going, and that God will supply exactly what we need when we get there. There is a bright future in store for each and for all of us, not because we're going to get every material possession we want, not because we'll never cry another tear, not because our political party will win this election, and not because our church is going to be bigger or better than anybody else's church, not because we'll always be comfortable or get everything that we want. Ours is a bright future because in the end, our God wins and we're on the winning team. That's why we can sing Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, an heir of salvation, purchased of God, born of his Spirit, and washed in his blood. This is my story, the story of a past that God has seen me through. This is my song, singing of the song of a God who has been an ever-present help in the time of trouble, and praising our Savior all the day long, all the way into the future that God has for us. Amen.